Hello and welcome to the Backlot 605 podcast. We are on episode number 143. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Casey Kelderman. Joined with me, as always, is my co-host, Brian Mensing.
What's up?
What's up, Brian? Are you ready for this?
I'm almost out of water. Do I need more?
You, as long as there's a lady in that water, you'll be all right.
As long as there's a lady in the water?
Hey, guess what, Brian?
What?
That's the movie we're talking about this week, Lady in the Water.
I'm glad we're getting it out of the way.
We're getting that out right on the top because obviously I hate when podcasts don't reveal what movie they're doing at the top because you know what? It's in your title of your damn podcast. Just reveal it right away. You're not hiding it from anyone. We're not hiding it. Lady in the Water is the movie of the week. We're talking some magic. We're talking some twist this month with M. Night Shyamalan because actually, in a way, this is kind of our podcast in a way coming full circle in 3 years because kind of one of our big, I don't know, arcs or movies that we covered when we first started this was Glass, M. Night's previous, movie before Old, finalizing that Unbreakable trilogy. We really focused a lot on that. We did a whole episode on Glass. I did a whole article leading up to the movie, I think coming out, or maybe right after it came out, and we had reviews of it. Like M. Night's been with us this entire time, so we're gonna keep that trend going here this month, where we're talking about all of his greats and maybe some of his not so greats, depending on your opinion.
His hits and his misses, his good, the bad, and his ugly.
And we have to talk about all of them. And to do so, why not bring in someone else who is also a virgin to the Lady in the Water world, the bedtime story that it is. This is a first time for all three of us, so why not suffer or get through it together? We have contributing writer to Backlot 605 and coming soon, Derrick Veurink, back on the show for the first time since, oh my God, I don't even remember. Too long.
Zodiac in December.
Holy shit, that's been way too long.
I was going to say, I was just waiting for your long pause for him to fill in because I knew he was going to be able to do it for you.
Since December was Zodiac with another great director, David Fincher, and now we're talking M. Night. Before we jump into it, though, Derrick, this is also, like I just said, this is a first-time watch for you, which already in our group chat was a shocking revelation, especially for Mr. Blake Ginnathan.
Yeah, I'm in shock here now because I missed that in the group chat, and I'm hearing this now. I'm like, what?
Yeah. So prior to this podcast, the only two M. Night movies that I had not watched was this movie, Lady in the Water. And I'll get into the reasons why when we actually discuss the movie proper. And the other movie I have not seen from M. Night Shyamalan is The Last Airbender, which one, I have not watched the actual Avatar Last Airbender series, and two, I've heard it's just god-awful. So I feel like I can just leave that one alone. But this was a notable gap for me, and I was glad to watch this to fill that gap. We'll see how I actually responded to it when we talk about it. But anyway, thank you, maybe, for letting me watch this.
Yes. He's like, is it The Sixth Sense, or is it more like After Earth?
See, that's the okay. We'll get into more M. Night as we get through this. And honestly, this is kind of a fun yet strange one to start off on because this is the turn in Shyamalan's career, because right after, we'll get into it more, but right after this is The Happening, which is like it happened. It's a movie. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people still don't know what to think about it.
Hey, it's a great comedy. I mean, M. Night should make more comedies.
It is a great comedy, and I wish we could play it at SuperCon because I totally would. But after that was Last Airbender, After Earth. That's 1-2 punch of holy shit, what happened to M. Night Shyamalan? And then he started to come back after this. So it's kind of fun that we're starting in the downward trend for this guy and then kind of going on the roller coaster ride throughout the month.
Yes.
Yeah. Brian's like, why did we start with this?
Because we want to start on a low note and work our way up the hill, not down the hill. I don't know.
I think we're on a steady path going this whole way.
Steady path.
We're on a nice steady path. But yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into the box office, the news for this upcoming or for this past week out there. We do got a little bit of news, Brian. One of them involves a gentleman from that SNL show that you like a lot. So we'll talk about him. But before we get into that, let's jump into the box office. Number one is Dwayne Johnson in Jungle Cruise with Emily Blunt, $35 million, numero
Yes.
uno for the great one, The Rock.
And from what I'm understanding, they released the numbers for the Disney Plus Premier Access, I think, at another 30 million on top of that. So not quite Black Widow numbers, but still decent for an opening weekend.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not, when you try and compare a movie like this to Black Widow, obviously a movie like this is going to be dwarfed nonetheless. But I think it's a decent start, and to be fair, it's going to leg out through the rest of the summer, as that obvious family option. So it'll do fine all told.
Yeah. And having had the opportunity to go see it, it's serviceable. I mean, it's not like it's a bad movie. I mean, you're talking about a Disney movie based on a Disney ride again. When they've run out of characters to try to pillage out of the depths of old literature, you go for Disney park rides. The one thing this definitely has going for it is great chemistry between Emily Blunt and Dwayne Johnson, and Jesse Plemons is amazingly just weird in this, and I love it.
I'm gonna pitch something right here on the show, just because you said something, and I'm like, all right, we got to do that now. When the new Haunted Mansion comes out, let's do a whole series on Disney theme park movies.
Okay.
I mean,
maybe we'll see.
We got some good ones and some strange ones in there.
So we got we got Pirates of the Caribbean, we got Haunted Mansion. What else we have?
Tomorrowland.
Oh,
don't forget the Country Bears.
Oh no, that's right. That was a movie. So we're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the Country Bears.
All right,
let's do it. Actually, Tomorrowland, that's such a weird movie. I would love to talk about it again. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I'd say the movie's good. Don't expect a huge in-depth plot, but I mean it's a good adventure movie, and I think it's at least worth seeing.
Yeah, a couple questions, Brian, since I have not seen it yet. One is, does it have strong like the Mummy '99 vibes? That's kind of what I get from the trailer.
This movie could straight up be in the same universe Brendan Fraser's The Mummy.
Okay,
easily. I definitely got that early Pirates of the Caribbean and Mummy vibe to it, like that early 2000s. Especially that's one of I guess my little takeaways from this is in terms of like some of the CGI with the they're not pirates, but their versions of whatever it is. I forget what they're called in the here. There's a little bit of that with the CGI. Seems a little reminiscent of early like Pirates of the Caribbean. But it totally feels like it could all be in that same because it takes place in around the 1910s, 1920s.
Okay. The other thing I was going to ask is, I know The Rock and Emily Blunt have all that banter stuff going on. My question is, do they actually try to make The Rock like a flat out romantic lead?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, you definitely get a little bit of that energy amongst it. And especially the way the movie ends. But no, they're making it more in like the adventure hero of kind of the Brendan Fraser, if you will.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, I wasn't sure if they would go down that road because I don't know if The Rock could actually pull that off, but I think what you're describing, that's probably the perfect range balance for him. So
yeah.
Okay.
All right. We're ready to move on. Number deuce is M. Night Shyamalan's Old. $6.86 million for the M. Night Shyamalan thriller.
Yes. This was the other half of my double feature that Saturday. It was Old and then Jungle Cruise. That's how I spent my Saturday morning before I had watched Mary Poppins.
Why did you watch Mary Poppins?
Because we had a Patreon episode that we needed to do Mary Poppins for live action animated movies. So go check that out on Patreon.
There we go.
Seamless plug. Way to go.
Yes.
I'm gonna throw another cheap pop out there. Hey, guess what? We're doing another Patreon bonus episode on this movie right here, Old. Yeah, go join us for $5 a month. Patreon.com/backlot605. New episode every week. Number 3 is The Green Knight. $6.75 million.
Are we gonna talk about Old?
I haven't watched it yet.
You're supposed to have watched it by now.
I am going to watch it this week. I was a little busy.
So all right, The Green
I was
Knight.
I was stuck on that same beach that they were, and I just kept growing older and older, and I finally died, and now I'm coming back. But The Green Knight, $6.75 million opening weekend for A24 back in the box office.
I really want to see this. I'm looking forward to wanting to try to get to this before it's gone.
I have heard nothing but incredibly great things about this movie.
I think if I see this in the theater, this might be the first movie I will have seen with Dave Patel actually in the theater. So I'm hoping so. It looks really, really good.
Yeah, this is the one movie from this past weekend that I did actually see in the theater Thursday night. I got there just as the 7 p.m. Thursday preview got out, and there was like a ton of people in there. I'd say at least 60 people. So that was a good sign of like, this movie's probably going to overperform this week. And I probably would have pegged it at 5 million at best to see it flirting at number at around 7 mil. That's pretty darn good given the current state of things. So
I think that fantasy audience I've been hearing has been going nuts for this movie. So that's good on A24. Like, this is kind of their first foray into like medieval fantasy. Maybe they'll continue to do that going forward, seeing that there's a niche audience for that.
And also I should say, I mean, this is a movie that was supposed to come out last summer. The trailers were already out for this movie when the shutdown occurred. So there's certainly been some pent up demand for this. And I think that helped out too here this weekend.
I'm still waiting for my Kingsman. Come on, dang it.
Christmas, December 22.
Maybe. That or Bond. That and Bond will just end up just floating off into the ether, and you'll have to find a bootleg VHS at a convention somewhere for both of them. We'll put them on both.
I'd buy a VHS player just for that.
Just for that. Speaking of, I don't know how I'm going to transition from VHS to this, but Black Widow. Guess what's not going to be on VHS? It is on Disney Plus, though, for that $30 rental fee. Black Widow, $6.47 million. A little controversy with this movie this week, too, if you might have heard. But
yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. I mean,
we don't need to talk about it, but
I understand I understand, and I totally get the reasoning. So, but yeah, it's Black Widow. It's good. I enjoy it. It's an MCU. It fits the formula.
I will also mention this movie is about 1.5 million away from becoming the biggest American box office hit of 2021, unseating F9. So by this time next week, it'll be the champion. It'll probably be the champion until like No Time to Die or Eternals or Top Gun or Spider-Man comes out. One of those. So
what about Shang-Chi?
I don't know how well that's going to do, to be perfectly honest. I think there's got to be the marketing's got to really ramp up for that movie to get people excited. We'll just have to see.
I have two questions on Shang-Chi to back onto that. Is Shang-Chi getting a dual release on Disney Plus?
No. So Jungle Cruise is the final dual premiere access release. That's what Disney announced back in May. They haven't diverted from that plan. So Shang-Chi will be the first true Disney movie that is theatrical only.
So I think that could definitely affect those box office numbers. And since Black Widow was pulling in what did they say, like 50 million or something like that on Disney?
It did 60 on opening weekend.
Yeah. So I think that'll be a fun experiment to look at when that movie comes out. What that one ends up at. And then number 5 we have, guess what? He's back, boys. Matt Damon, Stillwater. The latest Matt Damon film, $5.19 million for Mr. Matthew Damon.
Isn't this Matt Damon with a mustache again?
No, he's not. He doesn't have a mustache in this. He's like beefy with his Oakley sunglasses. He's from Oklahoma. He's an oil rigger.
He's got that bad goatee. That's what it is.
Southern Matt Damon.
Yes.
He's got the bad goatee. Got it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we'll see. I don't know. There hasn't been anything about this one to make me want to run for the theater to go see.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will be its one appearance in the box office, saying hello. We were a movie that came out in 2021. Goodbye.
And it'll be in Netflix in 3 weeks,
or whatever streaming service it'll fall onto. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. That's it for the box office. A tight knit race there in the number 2, 3, and 4 spots. But Jungle Cruise running away with it, cruising away with it, if you will, at number 1. Brian, what do we got for some movie news?
Because we all like Ninja Turtles, we got to have another Ninja Turtles movie. And it's been Paramount has gone on to say that Casey and Colin Jost to pen the new live action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. For those that are familiar, Colin is ScarJo's husband and one of the head writers of Saturday Night Live. Casey Jost, his brother, is one of the senior producers of Impractical Jokers. And so they know their comedy. So I guess we'll see how well the two comedic writers will delve into action comedy turtles kind of thing. I like the Jost brothers, so I have no qualms about this.
Yeah, I mean, if you want New York based humor, I mean, Colin Jost lives and breathes the city, so
A little bit.
So I don't have an issue with that. You know, obviously Colin Jost is more willing to play in the family movie sandbox, as indicated by his breathtaking performance in the Tom and Jerry movie. So
that is an
certainly, once again,
award-winning performance in Tom and Jerry.
He'll definitely be up for a supporting actor schmucky. I know it.
I was waiting for you to say he's up for supporting Razzie.
Alongside both Tom and Jerry, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't love Colin Jost. I had never heard of his brother before this. He's
Same.
a writer on Practical Jokers as writers.
No, he's a
producer?
producer. He's a
Wow.
producer. He's been with them for a very long time. But
Okay.
I mainly know that just because I watch the show and whatnot.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I mean, like Derek said though, we're talking about the Turtles being from New York. You can't get more New York than these two guys who basically have lived there their entire lives. Because Impractical Jokers is based off of Staten Island.
Which is fine, but I don't.
Yeah.
I think more as I want to see, like maybe they'll put out there like, hey, we effing love the Ninja Turtles. We grew up on Ninja Turtles. It's our favorite thing in the world. This is our passion project. Then I'm gonna be like, all right, sweet. But just on the surface, it kind of sounds like, all right, let's hire the hot hand of the SNL writer to do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, while we're also doing this weird Seth Rogen animated thing. And maybe I think Nickelodeon, I'm sure, is working on another TV show. I don't know. I would love to see maybe something more comic book style of writers be attached to the Ninja Turtles.
You'd probably get that more out of these two than you would out of Michael Bay again.
Oh, well, Michael Bay can go suck a fart because he doesn't need to touch Ninja Turtles ever again, but he will probably be a producer on these again.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, the article today did say that indeed he is a producer on this Colin Jost movie. So
And then it's probably up until Michael Bay actually dies, will he not be part of a producer on something that he's touched previously.
That's where I'm like, let's get the Henson Henson Corporation family involved with the Ninja Turtles again, like they did with the 1990 movie. Like, let's get some of that style of vibes back into this. Like, let's maybe make a live action Ninja Turtles that's maybe a little more mature. Let the animated stuff stick to the kids, and double dip into the Ninja Turtles IP.
Oh, that'd be so much fun. I'd be okay with that. All right, so
or maybe get this next director to do a Ninja Turtles movie, because I'd watch the shit out of that.
No, do not do that to my Turtles. I will take a Michael Bay over that any day. Wes Anderson
over a Wes Anderson Ninja Turtles movie?
Yes.
What are you
Tom
talking
Hanks to join Wes Anderson. Now, if I understand correctly, this is not the first time he's played in the Wes Anderson pool, correct?
I believe it is. Maybe you're thinking of like The Lady Killers, which was the Coen brothers.
Oh, that's one thing. Yes, that's what I was thinking of. So disregard. I retract my statement. I mean, Wes Anderson is at that point where like pretty much everybody wants to work with him. It's just a matter of probably scheduling and timing, and does the person fit the project he's working on. So the fact that we've got Tom Hanks, getting into the Anderson, ecoverse does not surprise me. Though I look forward to it because I do miss kind of funny Tom Hanks, and I hope this is where he gets to flex a little bit of those comedic muscles a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, yeah, Tom Hanks is very selective when he dips back into the comedy universe. Certainly movie wise, that was certainly clear to me. I think it was last weekend when I saw a league of their own at the state. And of course, that was right around the time when Tom Hanks was starting to try and be a serious actor. So yeah, I do kind of miss that. I mean, and to be honest, I think this is really cool casting. It's definitely a surprise on the Wes Anderson spear, because I was reading the other announcements leading up to this, like Bill Murray joins Wes Anderson's next movie. Gasp.
Shocker.
So to see him really kind of spice it up with this, I think it'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully it works.
I think this is one of those ones where I think Tom Hanks, like I said, I think Tom Hanks is going to have a little bit chance to be a little bit more creative than he has been in the past, because he's been hitting a lot of more of those serious roles and stuff like that. And he's just, like I think of back, when he did Larry Crown, it was kind of a hit and miss with certain people, whatever. But it's just because, he was finally just having some fun with the movie, and he wasn't taking himself so seriously, and people weren't, couldn't accept that. I'm hoping he has a blast making this. Like, I would go watch this movie simply because Tom Hanks is in it. I don't even care about anything else. It's Wes Anderson and Tom Hanks. I'll do it.
I'm really excited for the Wes Anderson Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that we are definitely going to get, where Tom Hanks plays the Rat King and is the main villain of the movie. I'm very excited for that to finally happen.
Owen Wilson as Casey Jones.
I was waiting for Tom Hanks as Leonardo.
You could have both Owen and Luke as two of the Ninja Turtles.
Oh, there you go. Owen would definitely have to be Michelangelo.
Wow, pizza. I can't believe it. Cowabunga, dudes. Wow.
Cowabunga. All right.
But Tom Hanks, I can see, the only thing I have to say is this. Tom Hanks will probably have a mustache in this movie. I just see him having a mustache in this Wes Anderson movie.
Oh, yeah.
I see that happening. I don't know why.
He'll have a mustache.
He's going to have that Polar Express mustache, but this time in live action.
All right. So, back on the Disney train.
Choo-choo.
Choo-choo. Disney is...
where was your segue there, Brian? You had Polar Express to Disney train, and you missed the segue.
I missed the stop.
I gave you a softball.
I whiffed it.
You did whiff it.
All right. Lakeith Stanfield and Tiffany Haddish to star in another version of the Haunted Mansion for Disney. So, I don't know. I guess we'll see how this goes. I mean, obviously, Haunted Mansion has not exactly been the most stellar IP that they've attempted to try to get off the ground. And hopefully this is good, because, I mean, I like these two actors. I think they're great in their respective works that they've done previously. So here's hoping to a better version than Eddie Murphy's.
I mean, yeah, I'm excited for this. I like you said, I like both of these two. I do want to see what they're going to do with some of these other IPs that they're saying they're jumping back into, jumping back into that type of world, like the Haunted Mansion. I think it's cool that it's, again, African-American leads. We've got black leads with Keith and Tiffany, who are both hilarious and fantastic actors, and they're both in their own rights. I think it's going to be having a fun take with the director. Who's directing this again? Is it
Justin Simeon, who did Dear White People?
Dear White People. So I think we're gonna have a lot of fun adventure and maybe even some like inside jokes of those who know like horror on why black people don't like go into haunted houses. That running joke, I think, is gonna play a big part in this movie here, of this black family buying this haunted mansion or inheriting it and being like, why are we doing this? Like, I think it's going to have a big meta take on this movie.
I kind of hope so, because, I mean, they've already done it a couple of times, and it's not exactly been the greatest of, so maybe they need to spin it a little bit differently for once.
That said, I'm going to hold out a very slight chance that maybe Disney will find some way to work Eddie Murphy into this. I would not be surprised.
He's one of the ghosts.
Actually, I would be. Could you guys imagine Lakeith and Eddie in a scene together?
That would be amazing.
It would sell itself.
Yeah. I mean, let's do it. Do it, Disney. Make it happen. Do it.
But that's all we got for the news this week. It's pretty light. It's
light.
Turtles, Tom, and
Haunted
nothing. I don't have another T. I was looking for something with a T.
The news is as light as water, like Lady in the Water.
No, I was going to say the terrifying Haunted Mansion. Anyway, continue.
All
Yes,
right.
it's as terrifying as this movie that we're going to talk about.
It is. For many people, it is. That is Lady in the Water 2006. As we're kicking off M. Night Shyamalan month. Boys, I already know we have very differing opinions on Lady in the Water, judging by certain Letterboxd scores and reviews, which is that's always a great discussion. Already knowing this going in, but Lady in the Water, obviously
knowing that you're outnumbered,
knowing that I am going to be outnumbered, outgunned, and
out-informed because I've got Derrick on my side,
and I'm gonna have to defend this movie that is not good, but I absolutely loved it. Lady in the Water 2006. Obviously, I'm not gonna ask the question. What's the first time when was the first time you guys watched this? Because damn it, it was within the last week.
It was within the last 48 hours.
Instead, I'm gonna ask the question. What's your guys' thoughts on the director of this month, though? M. Night Shyamalan. What was your introduction to him? What are your thoughts now in his over 20-year career?
Well, easily mine was The Sixth Sense. Mine was, Bruce Willis on the big screen when that first came out. And, I was riding hard strong with him. Lady in the Water is the first movie in the progression of those movies that were coming out where I was like, nah, I'm not going to go see this in theater. I'd seen Sixth Sense, Signs, The Village. There's something else in there.
Unbreakable.
Thank you. That I'm like, I had it even. But, this is one I was like, man, it didn't look appealing to me at the time. I think finally the next time I seen an M. Night movie in the theater again was when Split came out. And then, so forth and so on. But otherwise, yeah, there's a great, big, huge, almost 10-year gap in there of his movies that I hadn't seen and still haven't seen.
Derrick, what about you? What's your history with Mr. Shyamalan?
Yeah, so obviously The Sixth Sense, of course, that's when things peak through. As I've talked about in our group chat, The Sixth Sense came out on my birthday in 1999. And shortly after I watched an interview with M. Night where he said, oh yeah, The Sixth Sense came out on my birthday. So M. Night and I share the same birthday, which is this Friday, August 6th. And so I've had that at least very vague and tenuous connection to him for that. Maybe that's kind of what set up my whole vibe that I've just kind of, I root for the guy. Certainly, as a kid of the 90s, I think this was probably the first case where you had this instance of a, household name director breaking out before your eyes. Because certainly folks like Spielberg and Lucas and Zemeckis, they were already established when I was born. But just to see this guy break out at a very young age, I think he was 29 when The Sixth Sense came out.
But just to see him kind of really young.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But to see him kind of blow up and become this major force, but also become like this, in front of the camera presence, the way that Disney would use M. Night's name heavily, marketing his movies. Another aspect which we'll certainly get into, M. Night always taking it upon himself to appear in front of the camera to mixed results. But certainly, he was a name. And, I think that kind of set him up for failure, as we'll get into, with this string of movies, where you ultimately got to the point where if you would see a trailer for a movie of his come up and the narrator would say, from the mind of M. Night Shyamalan, and people would literally, I had seen this happen. People would start laughing in the theater. I think it was around the time that the movie he produced, Devil, came out, which is basically leaning into that, the elevator movie. They would lean into that, and people were like, they didn't get it. And then, of course, if you might recall, when After Earth came out, they did not even put M. Night's name in the marketing at all, basically to avoid that reaction. But then, I have been very fond of this renaissance that began with The Visit, where he kind of goes back to basics, keeps the budget small because, in case you didn't know, The Visit and Split in Glass, M. Night put up all the money for those movies himself. He self-financed those. So he's kind of really been, there's been that kind of desperation to make a successful movie, and I think that's really paid off with the movies that he's been putting out of late, even Old, which I know I was a little bit more keen on than Brian, but I think Old is exactly the kind of movie that I want to see from M. Night. And if he can keep delivering movies like that, I think we'll be in a very good position. So,
though you may have taken Old a little bit better than I did, I would have to agree with you there, is the fact that he's taking that effort, and I think he's putting more heart into it because he knows that his paycheck and his bottom line is basically being self-financed, that we're getting the M. Night that we did back when he first started, when he was fighting for the studios to pay him. Now that he can afford to basically do it himself, he's getting back to that, he's like, I'm at my core, if I don't do well with this here, I lose everything.
And he's getting back to his grassroots of like that low budget thriller, having maybe 1 or 2 stars if you can get them in it, but really using his style as the selling point for the movie. And like, when Old came out and the marketing came out for it, like Old feels like, okay, Old M. Night is actually back. Like we're getting that same type of hype, like for Signs, The Village, with that movie here. But like my introduction, like you guys, was The Sixth Sense. Like that was my introduction as a kid. Like I remember vividly watching the scene of the girl under the sheets vomiting as a kid and being like, "Yep, shut this off. I can't watch this anymore."
You were like 5. Why were you watching The Sixth Sense?
Because my parents were watching The Sixth Sense, and I was in the room. And after that scene, I'm like, "Shut this movie off. I'm not watching it anymore."
And nowadays, if you look at it, you realize it's a puking Misha Barton. It doesn't. It really. It takes all the mystique out of it.
Oh, it still reminds me of when I was a kid. Like, oh my god, I don't want a girl crawling under my covers puking on me. But since then, I've caught on to, as a teenager and adult, other M. Night Shyamalan hits, and then my first big screen introduction was The Visit, coming back, for M. Night, and haven't missed anything that he's released since in the theater, and I'm glad he's doing his thing again. I like M. Night is one of those filmmakers where I'm like, no matter what you do, I'm still gonna watch it because I'm at least interested to see what you can do with this. But there's 2 in his filmography that I think I'm like, those are just bad and just not M. Night Shyamalan movies. This is not one of those where, no matter how you feel, this is totally an M. Night Shyamalan movie. The Last Airbender and After Earth, I'm like, those aren't M. Night Shyamalan movies. Those are like director for hire. I'm making a studio movies. That's where I'm glad he's back to his grassroots of, this is an M. Night movie.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, in the landscape of the summer movie season that we've had thus far, I mean, just to have something like this, which is, I know it's based on a graphic novel, but it's still a very original concept, and certainly you juxtapose it against, like last week it opened against Snake Eyes, the G.I. Joe movie, which is like, yeah, that stuff gets greenlit easily because it's based on existing IP. But it is refreshing to have like a movie that gets into theaters solely based on the name of its director, that he still has that cachet, and that there are still a large number of movie buffs that will go see his movies because of that name and the memories of what he's given us in the past.
Well, hell, even here week 2 with it, it's at number 2. Snake Eyes isn't even in the top 5, so I think that's all clout with M. Night's name. That's 100% on M. Night. So let's talk about.
I was literally looking at that. I was having that epiphany right now. I'm pulling up the box, so I'm trying to figure out where G.I. Joe's even landed right now.
So, I think it's number 6.
But I was just
number 6 was Space Jam.
Ooh, wow!
Number 7 was Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes went from number 2 to number 7. He dropped 69.6%.
Oof.
Right. I not forced to divert and whatnot, but that to me is screaming that whole thing, like what I said before about the origins. Anything that's got origins in the name seems to like just be like, that shouldn't have happened.
All right, let's get into this movie for the week, and I just realized I have to try to explain this plot. Oh no, why? How are we gonna do this? So Lady in the Lady.
Good luck. Have fun.
I don't even know how to do this, and okay. So Lady in the Water. Know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna cheat. I'm just gonna read the Wikipedia synopsis. I don't know how else I'm gonna describe this movie. And this is what it says. The film's plot concerns the superintendent of a Philadelphia apartment complex who discovers a young woman in the swimming pool. Gradually, he and his neighbors learn that she is a water nymph or a narf whose life is in danger from a vicious wolf-like mystical creature called a skrunt that tries to keep her from returning to her watery blue world. So that's it. That is in this movie.
I'm glad Brian figured it out.
Is that why you wore that? Is that why you wore that shirt?
Yeah. So for our listeners who are not watching the YouTube version of this show, I'm currently wearing a Pinky in the Brain T-shirt, and the reason I wore it is because Pinky's one of his main catchphrases is "Narf." So, in honor of this movie, in which the Bryce Dallas Howard character is a self-described narf, that's why I wore it. So you're welcome. youtube.com/backlot605.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, so I mean, the whole idea of like this is based off of the children's story kind of thing. Like there's so many things about this that to me just make no sense whatsoever. I applaud M. Night's attempt at trying to make something coherent out of this, but to me it was a little all over the place.
And that's one thing about this movie that we definitely need to start off on. That this is based on a nighttime story that M. Night would tell his children. He's at this point in his career where he's probably not going to show his kids The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable or Signs or The Village. So this is a family picture, I guess, which is brought up explicitly by the film critic character in this movie. And we'll get to that scene, that this is a family picture. And apparently M. Night did write a bedtime story, a 72-page children's book on the movie. So that's a thing.
You know, when people say that, you know, instead of showing the exposition, they just talk it out. This is the first time I think I've ever watched a movie where the exposition was its own character.
Well, literally, the plot of the movie is a character by the name of story. Get it?
Yeah, that too.
Okay, so let's go around initial round robin, all three of us. Initial thoughts having watched Lady in the Water, first time ever. Our first time thoughts on this movie, maybe the most controversial in the entire filmography of Mr. Shyamalan. Brian looks so displeased.
Well, you know, we like to poke fun at the happening because that happened. Maybe I need to put myself through watching this again to make me understand what the hell just happened, because at least with the happening, I understood what happened. Here, there's just so much going on. There's so many different characters and so much that they were trying to meld into one story that it was just so convoluted. And Freddie Rodriguez, yeah. What was the purpose of the Popeye arm? Like what exactly did that give us in the story?
He's the protector,
the guardian.
Yes,
I understand that, but he didn't need a Popeye arm to be the guardian
and a Popeye leg.
I mean,
yes.
I will admit it is a funny big budget visual gag to have that camera reveal of, oh, this one side of his body is real buff and this other one isn't. I mean, you know, there are some actual decent comedic elements in the movie. They don't necessarily fit very well, but I will give it credit just for him. You know, M. Night has a very interesting sense of humor when he does decide to go straight up for a joke. It's a shame that Casey hasn't watched Old yet, because then we could discuss a certain character name in this movie that cracked me up.
The rapper.
Yes. I'm not going to spoil that.
No, don't. Please don't.
But yeah, I was amused by that. Now, granted, you know, I kind of got out of the path. I watched this movie first before both of you guys, just to have a clear runway of sorts. And, you know, I would say, yeah, it is indeed a mess. I mean, there are elements that are intriguing in it. I can certainly tell, you know, I certainly knew going into this conversation, Case is going to be like, yep, Bob Balaban death scene. I'm all for that. You certainly would like the Freddie Rodriguez moment, you know. But I think the failings of this movie is, it's a movie that's, about stories and storytelling and the power of the written word, and yet how it actually goes about telling its own story within that movie is just lands with a thud, is very, very decidedly uncinematic, in terms of like, what it puts Paul Giamatti through, to figure out the story and things like that. The narrative dead ends that this thing goes into, like especially when you have like the Paul Giamatti character talking to Bob Balaban about like, who's, which archetypal role. I don't think that necessarily works. What I will say here, and I do just kind of want to get this out of the way real quickly, is I don't know if you guys know some of the context behind this movie. But at the point when this movie came out, M. Night had just done The Village, which is a movie that, had mixed reviews. Certainly there was a lot of dissent, with the nature of the twist in that movie. Roger Ebert famously gave the movie 1 star, which in particular upset M. Night, which I think is a big reason why the Bob Balaban character is in this movie as kind of a retort to the people who dissed on his previous movie, which, if that's the case, is pretty petty, in my opinion. The other thing to mention is that M. Night had made 4 movies for Disney at this point. He did Sixth Sense and Unbreakable and Signs and The Village, all at Disney. And so there was when the movie came out, there was this big hullabaloo about the fact that M. Night gave his executives at Disney the script for Lady in the Water. They had a dinner with him a few days later where they basically told M. Night, we have a lot of concerns about this movie. We don't like the story. We don't like the characters. We don't like how you're giving yourself such a big part in this movie. And not just a big part, but also a part where you consider yourself to be like this massively significant writer that'll shape the course of human history. So M. Night decided, well, you guys are basically going to interfere with my creative vision, so I am going to walk away from Disney, and I can get any other studio in town to finance this movie and give me complete creative control, which is exactly what Warner Brothers did. And as you might recall, I mean, if you look at it, M. Night has not worked for Disney ever since, up to today, because of how they responded to the Lady in the Water script specifically. So, long story short, M. Night's going into this movie with, a lot of baggage, a lot of people telling him no, which I think really manifests itself in the way he approaches this movie, the way he kind of sets himself up as the character within the movie, the disdain he has for people who, disagree with him, which I think is where a lot of that Bob Balaban character mileage comes from. So I think that really kind of unlocks a lot of what you see in this movie, which I think gets kind of muddled when he's contrasting that with what he's actually trying to do with this bedtime story, which again doesn't work, but we'll get into it.
Yeah, this is one of the sloppiest movies that has ever been made. Makes 0 sense, but is wholly creative, and I can't think of another movie to compare this one to, because it is wholly original, which is a detriment and a positive to why people love or hate Lady in the Water. And I think a big part of this is M. Night's own ego at this point in his career, because coming off Signs, The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, even The Village, but especially with Signs, people calling him the next Spielberg, Hollywood's next golden boy of a director. We hadn't seen someone like the likes of Spielberg since the 80s, and then we had the indie guys of the 90s, but M. Night was that next coming of the big blockbuster filmmaker that could do no wrong. And then he proves with Lady in the Water, hell yes, he can do wrong, because this movie doesn't make any sense. But with that being said, I think because of its creativity, because of its originality, because of what M. Night is trying to throw into this movie, I loved it. And I kind of compare this movie to last year's Tenet with Christopher Nolan, where the first comment I said after watching Tenet was, how did Christopher Nolan...
again so you can understand it?
No, because that movie doesn't make any sense no matter how many times you watch it. Christopher Nolan, how did he direct Tenet with his head so far up his own ass? That's the same thing with M. Night here. How does M. Night direct a movie with his head so far up his own ass? Well, he does by putting himself in the movie as this God and basically God who's going to be like, I'm going to save humanity through my writing and my work. It's like, sure, dude. Yeah. And that's where it's like, is M. Night self-aware at this point in his career of what he's trying to do? I think that's a big question.
I don't think he was self-aware.
I don't think he was either.
I think he was writing from, quote unquote, writing from his heart. And I don't think he realized what he was manifesting while he was writing this out.
Oh, I think he was. I think he knew exactly what he was writing. But again, his head was so far up his own ass where he's the next Spielberg. He can do no wrong. Everybody else is wrong for thinking The Village isn't a good movie. I'm right. So I'm going to prove that I can be the greatest storyteller in the world, and my writing and my work will eventually make the world unite and save it. Like that's the biggest ego trip I've ever seen from a director on screen. But I applaud him for it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to be honest, I don't necessarily mind M. Night appearing in his own movies. I mean, it kind of goes back, to invoke another director comparison, and I'll have other things to say about this. I mean, it's kind of the Hitchcock element of it all. Because Hitchcock was also very much a director, who was a name brand to audiences, who frequently appeared in front of the camera, and even like, again, not to dovetail back to Old, but when he does show up in Old, it is almost kind of a, reassuring presence in terms of what he's doing in there and all of that. I mean, with what he's doing in here, it just came, because this movie takes itself so darn seriously, it doesn't really help there because, the movie is literally convinced, that M. Night, or M. Night's character, but let's face it, M. Night is, his words have significance with this cookbook, as they call it, that will contain the words that will inspire the future president of the United States. That's pretty hoity-toity for a movie about, water creatures and whatnot. So it's ballsy.
Yeah, and in reference to like Old and just him being in front of the camera and whatnot, like, I've kind of gotten used to an expectation of, he's one of those kind of directors who's always going to have a cameo in his movie. Not a problem. Like you said, Old, he's in Old. He probably has a bigger part than he has in some of his other movies and whatnot, but it's not to like this extent. Like, I don't have a problem a director having a cameo or anything like that, but there are a lot of directors who are very good at directing actors, but are not very good actors. And like, he's one of those ones where like, he's okay in the little bits that he does, but he's not somebody who should be on the screen that much. And I definitely think this movie shows that.
Oh, I actually think he's pretty good in this movie. Besides the hoity-toity dialogue of I'm the greatest writer ever and I'm going to inspire the next president of the United States, I think he's pretty good for a director acting in his own movie in this.
He's definitely not bad.
Yeah.
I think is probably the way to put it.
Yes, I would say that, but I mean,
he's not Mark Wahlberg in his next movie.
He's like, well, I couldn't get Mark Wahlberg, so I'll be in this movie instead. I'll do it myself.
But one actor in this that I do want to talk about, I want to get your guys' thoughts, is the star of the movie, the protagonist, Paul Giamatti. Jeffrey Wright's great in this. Actually, I think everybody's really good in it. But Paul Giamatti, I want to get your guys' thoughts on Mr. Giamatti in this, especially since he has the character distinction of having a stutter, except when he's around Bryce Dallas Howard's Narf character, who basically somehow, because of her presence, removes his stutter. So Paul Giamatti, what are your guys' thoughts on Mr. Giamatti in this movie?
I don't usually find anything that I don't like Paul Giamatti in. I don't think that in terms of this movie, I don't think he's one of the problems of the movie. I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily the people that are in this movie. I think it's the story, the characters of which they're playing. So I think for what he was given, I think he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, when I was watching this movie, it occurred to me. I mean, you know, this is a rare instance where Paul Giamatti is the straight up lead of the movie.
Hmm.
Like in the lead up to this, I was trying to think like, what are things that I had seen Paul Giamatti in, leading up to this movie. It's very much like supporting character turns. Like, one that immediately comes to mind is like when he's like the uh, antagonistic radio manager in Howard Stern's Private Parts,
Immediately was going to
or
go there.
like when he plays, like the big bad in Freddie Muniz's Big Fat Liar,
Yeah.
where his whole gimmick is like, hey, what if Paul Giamatti was blue?
Hmm.
You know,
Well, and even just this week, he's very much the supporting character. He does a fantastic job. He's very much a supporting character in Jungle Cruise.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those ones where it's like they didn't even put. I don't know if I even saw him even in the marketing for that movie.
And how could we forget his great Russian accent in The Amazing Spider-Man 2?
The Rhino.
Yeah, and again, this is also the point in time when this movie comes out where Hollywood is actually trying to figure out how to make him a big star. Because he had just done like these big like independent breakout hits like American Splendor and Sideways, which got him a lot of.
As I say, Sideways was before this, wasn't it?
Yep, Sideways was 04.
Yeah.
So he's like filming this like he's filming Lady in the Water right after Sideways goes through award season and stuff like that. So I think it's a ballsy choice, to have Paul Giamatti as the lead, and also, the fact that the movie really kind of leans into the schlubbier aspects of Paul Giamatti.
Mhm.
Making him like this, sad sack apartment manager character. Obviously, settling his character backstory, with the tragedy of his family, but even in like that opening scene, where he's like fighting whatever creature is under that sink, there's definitely enough of a hint, that at least there's enough of a hint that the movie is or could have fun with that aspect of Paul Giamatti's character. So I thought it was a very intriguing move of casting
Mhm.
on his part. It's the type of thing that could only happen at that specific period of time when this movie was made.
Yeah, I think what Giamatti does so well in this movie and what it really needs is kind of grounding his character inside this weird ass universe that M. Night is trying to do in the story that he's trying to set up. But I think what you need is someone like Giamatti who can play that everyman type of character. He has a little, like, you can tell still underneath the surface with any Paul Giamatti role, there's a little like little anger underneath all that. Always, like, you can feel it. It's always bubbling right underneath the surface. In any Paul Giamatti role, and like this feels like he has that, but it's because of this community that he's in within this apartment complex where he's found this kind of makeshift family in a way that really is grounding him to it. And I think we need a character like that and someone like Giamatti to pull off that role of still grounding this within, real life Philadelphia, but also telling this weird fantasy bedtime story with, Bryce Dallas Howard's character getting introduced to him. And that's where you need someone like him and not like, any other early to mid 2000s generic star. Like, could you imagine like going back to like who, Ryan Gosling back then, or who would have been like an 06 star? Tom Cruise. Could you imagine like Tom Cruise in this, or Mel Gibson?
I was just about to say, it's like, if you were going to go back into the archives of people that M. Night has worked with, Paul Giamatti gets replaced with Bruce Willis.
And that's where I think Bruce Willis would have been too much of a machismo type of character in this role, like, because that's what you see Bruce Willis as. But with Paul Giamatti as that schlubby type of attitude, where you need that in this role for him of, really kind of this wayward person trying to find his way in the universe.
Yeah, he definitely has that ability of encompassing the characters of who he is supposed to be. He's very much has that chameleon ability to him that, like you made reference to the Russian in Spider-Man, or, some of these other characters, you kind of lose sight on who he is because he can be anybody that, he's given a script for. So I definitely think do kind of wish that, Paul Giamatti would be able to get that bigger fare to the point where it'd be like, hey, this movie's starring Paul Giamatti, because I think, he is a fantastic actor that should be able to pull off, a leading role. He just needs a better movie to lead the role to.
Mm-hmm. Derrick, were you going to have something to say on Mr. Rhino himself?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, right now Paul Giamatti does kind of have a big showy lead role. It's on Showtime, which is why nobody knows about it. But he is the star of Billions on Showtime, which has been going on for 5 years apparently. But that's much more of like a high stakes, financial Wall Street type of guy, and not this very low status. To the Bruce Willis point, I think Unbreakable has a little bit of that lower status character to him, so I could kind of see Bruce maybe being able to like adjust to maybe what this character, who's, by the way, the character's name is Cleveland Heap, Heep, the first of many strange names in this movie. But yeah, to that point, I could certainly see Bruce Willis in this. It wouldn't have been out of the question. This was not at the point where Bruce Willis had completely given up on his career. But Paul Giamatti, a very inspired choice, and I think I certainly came around to that. So,
and one thing I really, really like about this movie, and that's where maybe we'll tie in Bruce Willis, is like this movie doesn't feel like there's I was about to say this movie doesn't feel like there's any egos. Wrong. There's only one ego in this movie. It's M. Night's.
Yep.
But that's where I find this movie very endearing, whereas this is a wholehearted vision by Mr. Shyamalan, and then you have everybody else just along for this ride. Like Giamatti knows his role, Bryce Dallas Howard knows her role in this. Like everybody knows their part in the story that M. Night's trying to tell, and is 100% on board with it. Like it just feels like one of those sets that no one would have been questioning it, because it would have been a movie that actually made a little more sense if someone actually did step up to M. Night and been like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or why are so many characters talking directly to the camera? Why at one point is the camera pointed on the critic character and spins around and now is in his point of view while he's getting introduced to the guy who only works out one half of his body? Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. But that's M. Night's vision of this whole movie. Like that's where I find wholehearted enjoyment in this movie, is that this is M. Night's vision. He saw it through. Everybody else was along for the ride, and we got to see that final product of this weird M. Night Shyamalan movie that only he could make at this point in time in his career.
I would say
go ahead.
I would say you're kind of right in terms of that. The cast is definitely putting their trust in M. Night to get through it. I would argue that the material they're given really doesn't give them much to do. And I think, especially with like the Bryce Dallas Howard character, because, it's a character who is, for being the titular character, the Lady in the Water doesn't really have much to do other than just sit around wearing Paul Giamatti's shirt and spending at least a third to a half of the movie in his shower.
And talking softly, or if at all.
Yes. Or like Paul Giamatti, like, tell me who you are. Like, nope, can't do that. Go ask your Asian tenant's grandma for all the details on who I am, please. Goodbye.
And that's what I find fascinating as someone who loves like how scripts come to be, is how the F did M. Night do this movie? Because it feels like he wrote it one time and never looked at it again until they were shooting this movie. Because this feels like a first draft of whatever this concept was of Lady in the Water. Of, I told my kids this bedtime story. Know what? I should make a family picture about this. And he sits down for 2 days, writes the whole movie, and is like, all right, let's do it. Like that's what this feels like.
Yeah, this is also the weird period in time where like filmmakers are increasingly leaning on their kids as kind of the inspirations for their movies. I know like the year before this is when you get Robert Rodriguez doing Shark Boy and Lava Girl, which is also very much like his kid is the co-writer of the movie. And it's kind of that weird little period of indulgence, which, can be endearing if you hit the right tone. to that extent, I don't really consider this to be much of a, family movie in that sense. As much as M. Night might want to argue it, certainly kids would watch this movie and be bored out of their skulls.
Yeah, this isn't a movie I'd be put in front of my kids going, hey, you should watch this. Yeah, that's not happening.
I'll be the weirdo that shows them Lady in the Water and Pan's Labyrinth at like 6 years old and like, here, enjoy, kids. Spoilers for my double feature. But this movie, so it starts off with this opening animation where you can feel like that's where some of the family elements, the kids stuff, like, is there. Like, you can obviously tell this is based on a kids story time, bedtime story. But then M. Night throws in all of the M. Night isms that are like, let's talk about the Asian mother and daughter who are basically just exposition dumps for what the story of the movie is. Well, for the character of Story. And how a lot of those scenes don't make a lot of sense, especially one scene that really sticks out for me is when the daughter is at a club for no reason at all and has to have this weird conversation where she over the phone tells Paul Giamatti, and then, oh wait, put my grandma on, has to hand the phone off to the grandma. We hear nothing on, of what's happening, then gets handed the phone. That happens like 3 times. It's like, in a better script, if M. Night had done, looking over his script at least once, would have been like, I can actually just tighten the script up by just having the daughter, at the apartment. We can just cut this down, quite a bit. But no, for some reason is insistent that this daughter is not there at that point in time. It's just stuff like that in this movie. It's like, why M. Night? Why?
You're absolutely right on that. I mean, this is a movie, at its heart about like telling this story, but trying to take a simple act of storytelling and turn it into a 1 hour, 50-minute narrative. And that's where you get not only this whole thing that goes on forever, because this is also like multiple scenes, where Paul Giamatti keeps going back and has to learn more and more about the story. But also like, especially like we're getting into the third act, which is the whole thing of, like finally being where like, he has to find these archetypes, within the tenets of his building. And he goes to Bob Balaban, and Bob Balaban in true all-knowing film critic fashion goes, oh yeah, certainly this person is, who's this, and this person's who's this, and this person's who's this, and we spend 20 minutes with that, and it ultimately leads to a narrative dead end. Which, certainly didn't rub me the right way. I mean, I think there's a core of a decent idea in this movie if you really want to make a movie about, how we tell stories, how we pass on stories and stuff like that. But to your point, I mean, that the best version of this movie is certainly 5 or 6 drafts away from where this landed.
Well, and in even that specific character, the way I'd hope to see it kind of play itself through is, you almost go to him as the film critic is almost as to be like the wise man. He's come here, he's the newest tenant, but he's able to figure out all these people's identity and where they would land within the story to see how that they would blossom into these characters for him to be like, oh nope, I was wrong. And we hit that dead end like you're talking about. So
yeah,
and then he gets his curmudgeons.
Yeah, and it's not just, the critics saying I was wrong. It's more like M. Night is saying film critics are wrong. When they say my movies are bad, they don't get it. Only I get it. It can't help but rub people some people the wrong way when you see it play out in that fashion.
So okay, that's one thing I want to bring up because I want to get your guys' thoughts because I like the stuff with the film critic. I do. I think it's M. Night having a lot of fun with critics, especially of critics of that did not like The Village, especially, and I think he's having a lot of fun with that, kind of being like, well, guess what? I'm going to make this weird movie called Lady in the Water, and everything you guys think is going to happen, well, that's not going to happen. And I'm like, M. Night still has that type of mentality to him, though. Because, like, this movie reminds me a lot of Glass, of subverting all your expectations and just literally drowning your main character in a pool of 1-inch water and saying, well, guess what? You guys didn't see that coming, did you?
At least Glass was good.
I like. Okay. We'll talk about Glass when we talk about another movie later on. But I think both of those are only M. Night movies, and that's where I want to talk about this critic character. And along with that critic character, though, I want to get so obviously story is, hey, guess what? That's the plot. That's the story of a movie. Guess what? That's what it is. The critic is M. Night's commentary on, critics, film critics, people who are opposing him. M. Night in this movie is pretty much still just M. Night. Who is Paul Giamatti? What is he a metaphor for? Do you guys think he is a metaphor for anything? Do you think he's the audience? Is that something M. Night is trying to put in this movie in some version of Lady in the Water? Is that something maybe he was trying to go for but wasn't hitting 100%? Because that's what I'm thinking. That Paul Giamatti is supposed to kind of be in that audience type of character, peeling back the story as an audience member, and then gets the payoff at the end of their part of this experience within a movie too. Do you guys feel like Paul Giamatti is supposed to be representing that at all?
I guess I didn't think of it that way just because I didn't see the depth there. But I mean, I could certainly see that perspective of, if you start kind of peeling back and what certain characters are supposed to be outside of what are the metaphor of those specific characters. I could certainly see Cleveland being the audience, because like what we said, he's trying to figure out the story within the story and whatnot, and that's what an audience member is trying to do when it comes to an M. Night movie.
And like he's peeling back the layers of everything going on, and I think this is especially a commentary on The Village. The Village, you can maybe figure out the first, because there's two big twists in The Village. The first is, hey, guess what? The monster's not a monster. You might have been able to figure that out, and then he throws in that second twist of it's in modern times. I think this kind of has some reflections on that, whereas with Paul Giamatti, where he visits the critic and all right, who are the characters in this story? How would I be able to figure these out? And when Giamatti realizes, oh no, these aren't actually who I thought they were going to be. It's not the easy answer. It's actually these other characters that have been set up earlier in the movie that are actually the guardian, the healer. What's the group called? Oh boy.
The Guild?
What's that called? The Guild. So everything he believes is one way actually turns out to be something else. What a twist.
Yeah, I guess that could work. I just don't feel like it.
Oh, it's not fully expressed.
That strong. I don't think it really had that strong enough of a payoff for that. Because a lot of these other characters in this apartment building, they're very, thinly sketched out. I mean, there are things that I do appreciate. I think the thing that I took away was, Jeffrey Wright as, Mr. Crossword puzzle expert. I mean, I could honestly listen to him, just with his sonorous voice, just talk about crossword puzzle clues all day.
He needs his own YouTube series.
Yeah. Jeffrey Wright, Crossword ASMR, I am there for that. I think there's a glimmer of fun in where this could have gone. I think it's very short-lived. Is you have that scene where Jeffrey Wright basically figures out, okay, I am not the interpreter or whatever the role is, or symbolist. And then they figure out it's ultimately his kid. And you get this really weird moment, where everybody goes around the kid. The kid opens up the cupboard in the kitchen, looks at the cereal boxes to get, to interpret the symbols of what he's seeing there. I think, that probably is what's missing from this movie. I think the things that we have found resonate more with this movie, whether it's be the Freddy Rodriguez part or the Bob Balaban death scene, or even, him looking at the box of Waffle Crisp in the cupboard. I think the movie needs more fun elements like this. If it, is able to express to the audience, hey, we're trying to have some fun here instead of taking most of this movie super duper seriously. I think that's where you'd be able to get the audience on board with this movie a lot more than where it ultimately ended up at.
I would definitely agree with that.
There's grains of all these elements that are in this movie. It's just, I don't think, again, one or two more takes over the script for M. Night of going through it, another 2 passes through it, he might had something on par with those earlier movies, Sixth Sense and Signs and Unbreakable. But it's just, I think it's that ego trip that he's on at this point in his career that ultimately leads to this movie's failure for a lot of people. And where I find this movie charming and endearing, that it is such a big failure as a movie, but it's also such a fun commentary on M. Night as a director and how he thinks of stories and critics, and what he thinks of himself as a writer and director, what he thinks of audiences, what he thinks of different types of characters and archetypes. Like, this should be like, it doesn't have that classic Joseph Campbell hero's journey going on. It's just, no, this is M. Night's story, and that's how he's telling it, which I find super interesting out of this movie. If anything, this movie is not great. I'm not saying it's great, but it's at least interesting, and it has great elements and nuggets of things that are there that you can pull out of it. But it just doesn't work as a movie as a whole. It works more of him commenting on movies and storytelling more than anything else. That's why I find it wholly so original. It's like, what other movie is really trying to do that and fails to even be a movie while doing that? Because this movie fails to be a great, compelling movie, but it's just M. Night's commentary on movies and storytelling as a whole.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, I think one of the other drawbacks to this movie is, M. Night is just so concerned, with the, the exposition, the telling. This is kind of one of his least visually interesting movies in his canon. I think it really kind of lands flat. The Scrunt, for example, that is garbage CGI. And I was like, this was visual effects in 2006. You sure this wasn't from 1996?
Right.
Because I was doing some comparisons. I was trying to figure out, like, okay, like, what was the state of visual effects at the time this movie came out? So a couple weeks before Lady in the Water came out, we had Pirates of the Caribbean 2, which of course had Davy Jones' character, which is probably the single most impressive CGI feat that had occurred up to that point. And so when we keep cutting back to the Scrunt character, I was just like, that doesn't really work for me. Another thing that didn't work for me is, so in case you didn't know, so obviously with this whole apartment complex, M. Night had, as part of his $70 million budget, they built this entire apartment complex for the movie. And to tie it into a series that you guys had done previously, I kind of initially got like Rear Window vibes. But the interesting thing is, like, with Rear Window, that is a very deliberate piece of production design, where everything is very carefully staged and set up, to make sure, like, from Jimmy Stewart's apartment, we can see into every other, tenant's apartment in there, to help understand the action of the movie. But then you get, like, the scene in the third act, where they've got, like, the fake party for Bob Balaban's character, the fake welcoming thing, which they're kind of using as the cover for Story the Narf to get past the Scrunt. I can't believe I just said those words. And that whole sequence, that's supposed to be like this incredibly suspenseful moment. And it really doesn't.
Anticlimactic.
Yeah, nothing really happens. It's just a bunch of people standing around in this pool area. And nothing is staged very interestingly. And, for M. Night, who can be a very compelling visual director, going all the way back to The Sixth Sense, even in Old, throughout his career, he's shown he can be a very, he can stage scenes and shots in the most intriguing manners. But I think this movie is really missing that. And I think that also doesn't help the movie's case at all either.
Another scene I want to bring up with the lack of suspense, where it's supposed to be a suspenseful scene, is where you have the scene with Story in Cleveland, where Cleveland's outside with the mirror, and she's on the walkie-talkie with him. Like, what? This is supposed to be suspenseful, right? There's zero suspense going on in that scene, and it's like, that's where I'm like, M. Night, what are you trying to do here? Like, why is there zero suspense in this scene? Like, what is that difference between that scene and, like, in Signs, where you have Joaquin watching the TV, and it's like, this is the most suspenseful thing ever, him watching an alien pass by on a TV.
I think part of the problem with that scene is we don't ever really get a good idea or impression of like how close Cleveland and the Scrunt are in relation to each other in terms of physical space. It never really makes it seem like that threat is really there.
Mhm.
What also is not helping in that scene is when Bryce Dallas Howard is talking on the radio. I know when I posted that I was watching this movie on Instagram, I had posted like the shot of where she's saying into the radio, like, what is the JG Scrunt doing? And at that point, M. Night hasn't even explained what a JG Scrunt is, but he's damn well throwing it into the movie, which is like, what the hell is he talking about? Which again diffuses the tension of that scene that should be there, and just as it says, like, what is he doing? That does not help. But yeah, definitely agree. That sequence is also, I mean, that should be a highlight of the movie. It is not.
Brian,
what?
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say is, you look at this and it's not like it's a horrible runtime. It's not like it's super overly long and whatnot. But it's like there. To me, it feels like it could have easily been tightened up and cut pieces. Then there's probably even characters that probably could have gone on the floor, and then you wouldn't have lost anything out of this. The problem is that for me that there's so much going on with this. It's kind of hard to figure out where would you want to clean this up at to tighten it up to make it more cohesive to the point where it actually makes a understandable film.
That I'll differ on that. Whereas I think I think this is kind of a breezy movie just because there is a lot of interesting elements going on in the movie. You're always kind of wondering, like, what the hell is going to happen next? What is M. Night going to do in this movie? And that's where I feel every character is necessary in this movie, especially with the revelation of like, no, the protector and the was it the guild and the guardian, the guild and the symbolist are they're not who you thought they were. Well, then it's revealed that it's other characters that were introduced earlier in the movie, including like the opening scene of the movie, actually pays off by the end of this, which I'm like, at least every character he introduces is brought back and is at least vital to the story that he's trying to tell in this movie. Is there a simpler path to it? Yes, there is a much simpler path to it. But I think that a lot of it is just M. Night's being M. Night, self-indulgent as he could ever be, and being like, this is the story I'm telling. You guys have to just be along for the ride. And one scene I do want to talk about, though, is the critic scene in his death. That's kind of the big scene I do want to talk about here with you guys, because holy shit, is M. Night just like, all right, this is not even a scene in a movie. This is just a guy literally talking to a camera, saying he's in a movie, saying this is the point in the movie where we're in a family movie where I'm not going to die. I'm just going to narrowly escape by running outside this door, and the wolf-like creature is just not going to catch me because this is a kid's movie, and you can't kill someone off in a kid's movie, and I'll say something that'll redeem me by the end of this movie. And M. Night's like, nope, we're not. We're just going to kill you right here, right now, off screen. All right, let's do it. Why not?
Because, he's being self-indulgent at this point right now. He's just like, you know what? That's fine. That's where it's like, at that point, he's basically trying to give the big middle finger to the film critics and whatnot, to the point where it's like, how much is that character even necessary in the film? Like, if he was trying to be more to telling the story of this water nymph, how much of that character was completely necessary, that if you would have, even removed him altogether and tightened the rest of the story up, could you have still pulled off the same, execution?
That's the one thing I would change about this movie, is I would have made the critic character the wolf creatures. No, the wolf characters, the Scrunts. Like, I would have made that character like he shows up the day that Bryce Dallas Howard's character does,
to make him the villain,
and make him straight up the villain. He's the wolf. He's the predator in all of this. He's the one attacking your story. Like, instead of M. Night's like, well, no, he's just going to be another character and we're just going to kill him off because critics don't know anything and I know everything.
No, that would have been I think that would have been a good way to pull that off. Otherwise, no, I like that. I mean, have him be the straight up the villain, make him be the wolf. Otherwise, without that, I mean, to me, his character is completely useless.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. The thing I wonder about it is, you almost, there's always the risk when you introduce a character into a movie that's very much a surrogate for film critics. The other example that comes to my mind is, in the 98 Godzilla, where, for very superficial reasons, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin decide, hey, we're going to have Mayor Roger Ebert as the mayor of New York City, his assistant Gene. We're going to use this to rip into the critics, that ripped us for Independence Day, which, again, not a terrible movie, but,
It's a fantastic movie.
but again, it's interesting, like how these filmmakers decide, like, for slight, disagreements, that they have for like their previous work, and then they decide to spiral it into, these characters that the filmmakers clearly dislike, which is why they're putting them in the movie, to be able to, it's just very wild, to be able to work out your issues, on a grand scale with these, 70, $100 million budgets. That's just absolutely insane. You know, and again, certainly the Bob Balaban death scene is one of the more memorable moments of the movie. I mean, when I saw Casey's Letterboxd review, I figured, okay, of those 4 stars, at least 2 of those stars is probably for that scene. I would not be surprised.
And that character as a whole, yeah.
So,
yeah. So I'm gonna go into. Let's get into final thoughts. M. Night Shyamalan's Lady in the Water, because I just want to hear everybody's final thoughts on this, and what worked, what didn't work. Do you recommend it? I think that's the biggest question to leave off on. So
I wouldn't say I recommend it. I'm glad that I finally watched it. I will say that. I mean, probably with any M. Night Shyamalan movie, his movies need to be seen even if they're not good. Because certainly he is a very unique filmmaker. He is a messy filmmaker, and this is certainly one of his messiest movies, if not the messiest. Granted, I thought, the way that the movie landed, despite M. Night's quirks and his messiness, I don't think that ultimately puts me in a position where I can still recommend the movie. I think ultimately, what he does here sinks the movie. But I would not discourage anybody from at least watching the movie just to see it, because to what Casey was saying earlier, there's no other filmmaker that could have done a movie like this at the scale that he made it at the point in time that he made it at. It is a very unique entity, and certainly no other filmmaker, certainly in 2021 movie culture, unless they've got like a blank check from Netflix or something like that, they're not going to be able to make a movie like this, with complete creative control, where they just get to do whatever they want of no consequence. So,
Brian, yeah.
I do kind of have to mirror on Derrick's response here in terms of this. I mean, in terms of the movie and what I've experienced of M. Night's, I agree. I mean, is it a great movie? Would I recommend it? I would recommend it if you haven't seen it as an M. Night fan, because Derrick's absolutely correct. He's has he done what feels like director for hire with like Last Airbender and stuff like that? Absolutely. But he is definitely a unique filmmaker, just to the same extent where I tell people, like, you might not like every single Kevin Smith movie out there. You might not necessarily like every Tarantino movie out there, but they are their movies. They are not going to be for everybody. This is another prime example of that. Is it going to be on, something that would be on a rotation for me to watch? Probably not. But at the same time, too, if you have other appreciation for other M. Night movies and whatnot, you definitely want to be like, yep, I have at least been able to experience and be able to, give it its place amongst the rest of the M Night movies as well.
Yeah, this is one of those movies. If you are a fan of M. Night and his work and you want to follow, well, his story as a filmmaker, this is an essential watch in that story as a filmmaker, because you go from someone who has this trilogy of major hits. Then you see the kinks in the armor with The Village. Then you have Lady in the Water commenting on those. And then you have The Happening kind of poking fun of himself as a director and a filmmaker in a way. And then you have the Hollywood stuff like Last Airbender and After Earth. And then you see his career kind of coming back full circle nowadays. The Visit, Glass, Split, and Old. You see kind of this the only career trajectory that M. Night could have. No one else has this style of career. Please, Tim Burton, at some point have this type of career where you finally come back for the love of God. But he has not. Only M. Night has this type of filmmaking career, and he's one of those filmmakers. He's like a Kevin Smith, a Tarantino, like you said, Brian, where it's like no matter what they do or make, they're gonna have that fan base, and they're either gonna love it or hate it.
Be talking about it,
and you're gonna be talking about it. And this is one of those movies where it's the messiest M. Night movie. It's the most M. Night of all M. Night movies. And it has to kind of be seen to be believed that this is actually a movie that was made with a big budget, a big cast, a major release, and actually happened. It's just one of those movies. It's like I said at the top, how do I describe this movie? You can't. It's a movie like none other and has to be seen to be believed. So that's Lady in the Water. And then last question, of course.
Actually,
go ahead.
Before you get into your like double feature stuff.
Yeah.
Because I happen to pull it up here, and I find the trajectory of this very interesting. Because, like you said, we have The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Science, and it's The Village is where it starts to falter a little bit, and then M. Night really can't seem to get his footing, right? And up until we get to The Visit, where he starts to kind of go back, where he's self-financing, he's finding his perfect place, whatever, right? He's kind of getting back into that. I'm looking at this. And you made mention with Disney and whatnot that The Village was the last one he was with Disney, right?
Yep.
Lady in the Water is Warner Brothers. Can't seem to get a footing. The Happening is with Fox. Can't get a footing. The Airbender is with Paramount. Can't get a footing. And then After Earth is Sony Pictures. It's not until he gets to The Visit, kind of rediscovers himself with Universal. It's been with Universal ever since.
And part of with Universal is he actually used kind of Blumhouse's deal with Universal to leverage, getting his movies initially released by Universal. And Old, in fact, he's still with Universal, but he's not going through Blumhouse for that. So again, yeah, you're right. He has definitely found a new home, and certainly Universal, since they're keen on the low budget stuff with the Blumhouse side, they'll certainly stay in the M. Night camp for a while. I think M. Night has like another 2 movies committed with Universal in 23, maybe even 25. So yeah, it is a fascinating career arc. I will say that.
Oh, definitely. And I think if he keeps with the self-financing or whatever the case is, that Universal's more there for support. I picture them easily saying, okay, if we're keeping the low budget and whatnot, I picture him staying there for quite some time. Honestly, Universal knows that they're going to pack a lot more punch with stuff like Fast and Furious, whatever, where they're going to throw a lot of the money. But if they're going to throw the small bones to somebody like M. Night, that's a little bit more on the creative style, they're absolutely going to keep going for something like that.
Yeah. And M. Night still has a lot of runway. I mean, he turns 51 this week, so he's still got a lot of room left in his career, to keep cranking out stuff. And to that extent, I'm glad, it is kind of good that, he exploded as early as he did and kind of got out of this rut as quickly as he did, where like the more movies he'll keep making, the more that it'll be very clear that period, of Lady in the Water through After Earth is very much an aberration. I think that'll definitely help out to his benefit.
Let's just hope it doesn't go full circle and he ends up, getting full of himself again and makes Lady in the Water too.
I thought you were going to say he couldn't go completely full circle because Miramax isn't a property anymore, so he can't make Wide Awake too.
He'll find a way.
Oh, we shouldn't tell Casey that at the end of Old, Bryce Dallas Howard shows up, and it is part of the Lady in the Water cinematic universe.
She pops out of the water on the beach.
Shh. I was trying to keep that a secret. That was the
Damn
twist
it.
we weren't supposed to talk about.
Damn it!
Spoilers. All right, let's get into it. What is your dream? I don't even know if I could say dream double feature. But if you were going to watch Lady in the Water again, what's the movie you would pair it with immediately following or something beforehand?
So I had two. One I kind of mentioned already, which is pairing it with Rear Window, because in a way this movie is M. Night's Rear Window, and especially given the M. Night Hitchcock comparisons. There's that. I had also thought of just pairing it up with The Shape of Water, which I think kind of does a lot of, or not a lot of, but some of the same stuff that Lady in the Water is trying to do a little bit more successfully, in terms of, trying to mirror classic stories and stuff like that. So that's what I would offer up.
Derek took mine with The Shape of the Water.
Damn it.
I was
Well,
like,
I'll stick with Rear Window, and you can have The Shape of Water. There you go.
When you start with Rear Window, I'm like, oh yes. Oh wait, he's got two. No, he's gonna do it, isn't he? Dang it. So that's where my brain immediately went, and start with Lady in the Water and end with Shape in the Water, just so you end on a better
The
film.
Shape of Water. Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go with the other Guillermo del Toro that I said earlier. I'm gonna go with Pan's Labyrinth. I'm gonna do Lady in the Water and then Pan's Labyrinth, where it is kind of this childlike fairy tale type of story, but takes a darker path. Pan's Labyrinth is kind of like what Lady in the Water could have been if it was actually well written and was trying to actually focus on that story, whereas Lady in the Water is trying to do all these weird versions of the Lady in the Water story, but then it's also not necessarily about that. It's about storytelling and everything that we said previously on the podcast. But it's like if he focused on telling the mythology of Lady in the Water, that's what Pan's Labyrinth is like.
So I have a just weird random thought that came to my brain here. So her in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, where we had Dark Castle, right? Mm-hmm. Had a couple of guys that were like, all right, we're going to make this production company that is, when they were doing the Castle movies, whatever the case is. But all of a sudden, I just pictures like, what kind of movies do you think we would get as if you had a production company where you had like the minds of like M. Night and Del Toro together to, have one mind making a movie? What do you think we would get out of that?
The Shape of the Lady in the Water. I think you'd get the stuff that those two guys do right now. Like, I feel like every Del Toro movie is a Del Toro movie. Every M. Night movie is an M. Night movie.
But what I'm saying is a collaborative. I want to see like an M. Night and Del Toro movie, like together. Like, what would these guys together make?
It'd be a movie that was produced like M. Night produced, that we talked about earlier, Devil. Like, I could see if those two had a production company, it would be making stuff like that movie, which I really like that movie.
I do have to point out Dark Castle, because I have to give a shout out for my boy. Dark Castle was co-founded by the one and only Bobby Z. So
yeah,
I have to
give him the praise for that. Zemeckis and Joel Silver. Forget who the third one was, because I know there's three guys.
Yeah, Gilbert Adler, who had done Tales from the Crypt with them.
Yes.
All right. So enough about Dark Castle and that shitty group of movies. We talked about a shitty movie and Lady in the Water, but next week we're going to be talking about something much, much better. We're going to go back to 4 years previously. Next week we're going to talk about Signs, one of the best M. Night Shyamalan movies of all time. So we'll definitely be discussing that on next week's show. But Brian, let's get into the plugs. Let's let people know where they can follow us on social media.
Those things right there. Those
little plugs. Yeah.
Those little plug things. The outlets are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd HQ. You can check us out. It's all at Backlot 605. Also on Facebook, that South Dakota Film Community Group, discussing movies and filmmaking and all sorts of fun stuff. So definitely want to join the conversation.
Absolutely. Join us there. We will be announcing the dates for the next upcoming South Dakota Film Community Group, but it's going to be the last Wednesday of every month, as it always is. But if you like this podcast and you'd like to hear some more, hey, go ahead, subscribe to us. We're on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Amazon Music, and on YouTube as well to see our lovely faces and to see what Brian's background will be each week. It's a new and different one every time. And this time we get a wet Paul Giamatti. What else could you ask for?
Hot.
Also,
he's a sexy beast.
He is a sexy beast. He has an epic beard in this movie. I like his beard. But let's give a shout out to our patrons over on patreon.com/backlot605. Hey, guess what? One of our patrons is on the show, Mr. Derrick Veurink. Derrick, well, since you're here, we got to say thank you in person then to Derrick. So thank you so much. Hopefully you're enjoying that we effed up, in June and didn't have any episodes and have, brought a new episode every week.
I am genuinely stunned at just how much you've ramped up the content on the Patreon. It's probably a very good plug. I mean, again, if you want to hear them talking about the newest movies, on a pretty much weekly basis, that's well worth it. So kudos to you guys for putting in all the additional effort to really make the Patreon valuable for us.
Effort.
Oh, it was all because I'm like, shit, we didn't have anything in June. Now I feel bad. I'm like, you know what? We're doing one every week from now on because we need to be the best Patreon out there and we have to have the best content. So hopefully we did. So hopefully Brian's surprise on our Space Jam: A New Legacy episode was worth that $5 a month. I don't know what Sam Lenz is, but who knows? Sam, I love you, buddy. Special thanks to our other patrons, Logan, Blake, Andy, Lou, Corey, Darren, and John. Hey, guess what? Darren's going to be on an episode coming up very, very soon. We're going to have to get John on sometime and round out our patrons on the podcast.
Absolutely. Get everybody
You might just have to make that an actual perk. If you pay at a certain level, you get to be on the show.
Patrons on the podcast. I like it. All right. What else do we got to plug? Do we have to plug anything else? I think that's about it.
I think that's it.
Can I do a plug?
That's the next plug I was going to go to Derrick. Plug coming soon, and plug also where we can hear your voice elsewhere.
Yes. Plug away. So I, as Casey mentioned at the beginning of the show, I am a contributing writer for Backlot 605. Every week I do the coming soon article, which I know many, including, some people on the show, use to plan their weekly movie watching, keeping track of what's in theaters, what's on streaming, what's on VOD, what else is what's at the local theaters, all that stuff. This week is actually the 18-month anniversary of when I started doing this. So it's kind of crazy already, but, when you start doing this during a pandemic, it goes by fast. So feel free to read up on that. This week you'll get to read about the Suicide Squad and the Val Kilmer documentary and all the cult stuff showing at the state, like Wet Hot, which we talked about here previously on the show, and Labyrinth and Flash Gordon. So look at all that. You can also hear me from time to time as a guest host or fill-in host on our good friend Andy Heller's podcast, The Criterion Break, as I've been kind of subbing in briefly while Blake Ginnathan is still on paternity leave. We haven't done an episode in a while.
Kids are born or something.
We haven't done an episode of the Criterion Break in a while, but as soon as Andy feels ready to contribute again to that, I'll definitely be there, willing and ready. And then if you are in the South Dakota Film Community Group, I do post a lot of stuff to that, trying to help spur the conversation on that. Today we were talking about the 25th anniversary of Danny DeVito's Matilda, a movie which Brian has admitted he has not seen, in which case he has said he's going to fix that. So
yes, thank you for being our resident historian.
Anytime.
I'm just going to say right here, right now, 2022, we're doing Danny DeVito as a director during one of the months. Just saying we're going to do that.
Okay. I can live with that. I can truly live with that. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything other than Matilda that he's done, but I can live with that.
Well, there's The War of the Roses. There's Death to Smoochie. There's Hoffa, Duplex, Throw Mama from the Train, I think.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've seen
lots of
2 of
stuff.
those. I've seen Death is Smoochy and Throw Mama from the Train.
We got a lot to choose from. We're doing Mr. Frank Reynolds month at some point. We're definitely going to do it. But yes, let's wrap this thing up. Derek, thank you so much for joining us on this. Thank you for either suffering or at least crossing off Lady on the Water off your bucket list of maybe.
I will officially say it's the latter.
But we will be back next week. Like I said, new M. Night Shyamalan movie every single week this month here for the month of August. And also go check out patreon.com/backlot605, where we're going to be talking about Old this upcoming week. So definitely, if you want to hear our thoughts on the new M. Night, you're going to have to pay for it. But until next week, for Derrick Veurink, for Brian Mensing, I am Casey Kelderman. We're going to check y'all out next time on the Backlot of where? Hey, guess what? We're in South Dakota. Peace out.
What a twist!